Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at a couple of options for creating line graphs that display the cumulative year-to-date value over multiple years. So the first option is where we've got the date range for the current year and we've got lines for all of the previous years that we want to analyse. The second option is where we've got a date axis for the full period we want to analyse with a separate line that shows the cumulative year-to-date values just for that year. So we'll be looking at how to set these up and the pros and cons of using each approach. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the data. So we've got two tables. We've got a date table, and that's going to be what's going to provide us with our x-axis. And we've got the downtime event details. So these are going to be the list of downtime events. So a machine broke down, for example, it got logged as a downtime event. And the cost of the downtime itself, in terms of how much production we lost, and the actual cost to repair it has been logged against each one of these downtime events. So when we sum that together, that's going to give us the total cost of the production outage. So I've created a really simple measure here, total production outage versus labour versus spare parts costs, and that's going to give us our total downtime cost. Then I've gone and created a measure that converts that into year to date. So we're going to calculate the total downtime cost, and we're going to use this function here, dates year to date, okay? And it's going to be over this date table here, date column in the date table here, and that's what's going to give us this cumulative value here as it builds up over time. So then I've plotted that on a line graph. Okay, so that's a starting point. So the first option we're going to look at is where we filter for the current year only and add additional lines for prior years. So let's change the filter context here. Okay, so we've changed it to display the whole of 2023. Now we need to be able to display the whole of 2023 because we need to be able to see what the value is, or we need a value here for the previous year. So for December 2022 or 2021. So we need the whole date range. So that's why we've filtered for the whole of this year. And we can see here that we've got the cumulative cost here building up for 2023, and then it flat lines across here because there are no additional values. So it's just allocating that value because that's the current cumulative value for each one of these dates in the future. So now what we're going to do is we need to layer on top of this the values for the previous year's year to date. So let's go in and look at what I've done for that. So we've created this measure here, total downtime costs, year to date, year minus one, display in filtered year. So that's really just for me to be able to understand which one of these we're working with. So we're going to go and we're going to use a calculate statement, and we're going to calculate the total downtime year to date. And we're just going to use this date add, and we're going to, date add takes two or three parameters. It's a date column that we're going to go and traverse back or forward across, for want of a better word, and then it's going to be the number here which corresponds to this unit measure here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the current date in the current filter context, so this could be say the 1st of January 2023, which is this date here, right at the very start here, and we're going to go and use this date add to modify the filter context because that's what calculate does, and we're going to look at the date a year ago. Okay, so it's going to be the 1st of January 2022, and then we're going to display this cumulative or total cost of downtime to that point in time, okay, for that year. So it's going to be for that year. So that's going to be what we're going to do for the previous year. And then for 2 years ago, and you need to create one of these, or there may be another way, but how I've done it here is you need to create a different measure for each year. Okay, so this one's going to look 2 years up, 2 years in the past, and I've also even got one for 3 years in the past. Okay, so you need to kind of have a little bit of an idea about how far back you're going to look, but eventually your graph's going to get quite crowded if you look at any more than 2 or 3 years in the past, because each one of those is going to be a separate line. So those are the measures. So let's add those into this line here, this line graph here. Okay, so I'm going to add that measure there. Okay, so now we can see we've got the lines here, and it's still looking a little bit busy. So let's see if we can tidy this up a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is this line here. I want to get rid of this line here because it is not really adding too much value at this point in time. Okay, so I just want this to build up to be the most recent value, and to only display a value up to the point in time where we've actually got a value, or to the current date essentially. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and modify the measure here. Okay, so this one here is going to be called downtime costs year to date future blank. So what we're going to do is if max date, so if the current date here is less than today or less than equal to today, we're going to display the total year to date value. Otherwise, we're going to display a blank. Okay, so we're just going to wrap that year to date value in a bit of an if statement that's going to basically make it display a blank rather than display the current year to date value for all of these dates, which is not what we're wanting for this particular example here. So let's go and we'll add that in, and we'll just take out the total year to date value there. Okay, so we can see that it's disappeared. There's not a line here, but it's still a little bit of a jumble here. So we're going to go and actually modify the chart here to make this lines a lot clearer. Okay, so we'll give ourselves a bit of space here. We're going to go to lines, and we're going to go and we're going to find this one here, which is the downtime year to date value. Okay, so the value is going to be solid and it's going to be rounded, and we're going to increase this stroke size, and I'm going to make it at least one. In fact, let's make it 3, so we can see that starting to become a bit more obvious here, but still not brilliant. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into these values here, and I'm going to select all, and that's going to open up this ability here to change the color of each one of these lines. So let's start just changing the color of these. So that's going to be our main color here, which is going to be this one at the top, and then this one here I'm going to make a grey color. So let's go and we will choose that one there, and then the other one I'm going to make even lighter. So let's try this one here. Now it might be too light. Let's see, no, it's fine. Okay, so we can see here we've emphasized this color here, and I've started to de-emphasize these other colors here, but there's still a bit more that we can do here to make these de-emphasized and this one a bit more emphasized. Okay, so I'm going to go in here to the settings, and I'm going to select this one here, which is our current year to date value here, and I'm going to use a stroke width here, which I've actually already increased to 3. Okay, so that's going to be the first one there. And then let's look at the previous year. So that's currently sitting at 1, but I'm going to make that 2. And the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make that a dash line. Okay. Now I think personally that's still a little bit too dark, so we're going to play with that colour in a second. But then I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose this one here, which is 2 years ago, and I'm going to make that a dotted line. Okay, so we can see that that one's probably too light and that one's probably too dark. So let's go back up here, and we're going to select applies to all, and that's going to open up our colors here. And then I'm going to make this one slightly lighter, and I'm going to make this one slightly darker. Let's see how that looks. Right, perfect. I think that's good. Okay, so next up is going to be to configure this legend at the top here. So we're going to go across, the legend's on. The first thing we're going to do is change the style. Now I'm happy enough with that in the top left. I think that's a good place for it to be. And we're going to go and use this option here, line and markers, because I really do want to see the line style, because that makes a difference for these. Now the words here are far too wordy, so let's go and we'll change that. So we've got this one here, which is 2 years, this one which is 1 year, and this is the current one. So I'm just going to go and change these. Okay, so 2 years ago, last year, and then the current year, and I'm going to actually change the order they're displayed here. I'm going to reorder that because that's going to reorder this at the top here, because I want current year to be first. Okay, current year, last year, 2 years ago. Perfect. Now the other thing we can do is we can actually add in these direct series labels here. So I'm going to go and do that. In fact, actually before I do that, I'm going to go and look at the legend text, and I want to make that smaller. Okay, so I'm just going to make that 8. It doesn't need to be big. Okay, current year, last year, 2 years ago, and the color for just now is just fine. Okay, so like I say, let's go down and we will find the series labels here. So I'm going to open those up, switch that on, and we can see that we've got the last year, 2 years ago, and the current year goes all the way along here, which isn't really what I want. So what I'm going to do with that one is I'm actually going to turn that off. I've got enough here to say it's a current year, and we can see that it's clear here that it's a current year, so I'm actually going to turn that off for that one there. So go to current year, and I'm going to turn the series label off. And I'm going to go into the values, and I am going to, well, for the current year we don't need that, but for the last year I'm just going to make these bold and make them slightly smaller as well. And I'll do that for the other one, and I'm going to make it slightly lighter. In fact, actually, yeah, I'm going to make it slightly lighter just so that it matches the colour here. So the theme, again, this is the current year, this is last year, this is 2 years ago, de-emphasising it as it goes further back in time. Right, okay, so let's just move it up a little bit. That's fine. And the next thing I'm going to do is I actually feel like I'm probably going to make that slightly lighter. We're using 3 points here, so let's see what it looks like with just one. So we'll go back up to line, we'll go to the current year, and let's see how it looks. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, so next we're going to go and I'm going to replace this date here. So if I go into this field here, we've actually got the date. Okay, so each one of these points here is a date, so we can see that there's quite a high granularity there. But I think we could actually replace that with the date and month, and that's going to then summarise the losses by month, and there's going to be less data points and it might look a little bit smoother. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to go in here and we're going to use calendar month year, and then I'm going to go to this date. Let's just see how it looks. Okay, so that looks a little bit smoother, and because there's only 12 data points here, the date range was actually, because it was a continuous date range, it was a date, then it was actually more or less given as a date or a label for every month anyway, so it isn't actually increasing the number of labels. This one's a little bit awkward here, but that'll be fine. Now the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add on the data labels, but just for the current year. Okay, we're not really too interested in the ones for the previous year at this point in time. So let's do that. So go to data labels, we'll switch that on. It's going to show data labels for all the years, and then we just need to switch off the one for last year and for 2 years ago. Okay, and that's just going to give us the ones for the current year, which I think is pertinent to what we're looking at. So that's the first option there. So the first option is to allow us to show the current year plus the previous years all on the current year's date range. And the advantage of that is that we can clearly see and compare the current year with the previous years if we're wanting to understand, okay, where were we at this point in the year for last year and for the year prior to that. Now the obvious disadvantage of this approach is that everything's going to be on 1 year, so you do need to, everything's going to be in relation, sorry, to the current year, so you do need to go and read these to actually be able to see them. It's not going to be obvious because we don't actually show the previous years on the x-axis that it was for the previous year, so that spatial connection between the actual date and the value on that date is not there. The other thing that this is going to be is that if you get any more than these lengths here, and they're fairly close together as it is, then it's going to become quite jumbled. Okay, so the more lines you get on a line graph, I mean 3 is fine, 4 or 5 is starting to get a little bit crumpled, after that it's probably unreadable. So that's another factor to consider. Okay, so that's the first option. The next option is where we're going to show one continuous date range, and we're going to show lines for each of those with different formatting. Okay, so I've got a line graph here, and I've already added the date axis, so you can't actually see it at the moment. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to add some measures here to build up the lines for each of the years. So the current year to date plus the year to date for the previous year, and we'll go back a few years. So the other thing I need to do here is I need to change this at the top here. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see the date here. So we're going to go back to 2020, and we're going to go to more or less the current date here. Okay, now we could use relative dates with this and just look back, but I'm just going to put in these dates here since I want to be able to sort of mess about with them a little bit. But the idea would be that you would use relative dates so that it would look back for the last 2 years or last 3 years or whatever it is you want to look back. Okay, so let's have a look at the measures. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to create the total downtime cost year to date for the current year only. Okay, now it's fairly straightforward, there's nothing complicated about these measures. the first thing we do is create a variable, which is to say, okay, is this year, so we basically want to get the year, or extract the year component of today, which is basically going to be whatever the current date is when this was last refreshed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and calculate the result, and it's a simple if statement. If the year max date table date, so the max date table date is essentially just taking whatever date we're currently on with the current filter context that's been evaluated, is equal to this year. So if the year we're evaluating in each of the different years in the x-axis, which will be along here, you can't see it just now because there's no measures, is this year, then we're going to display this value. Otherwise, it's going to default to a blank, which is the kind of else statement for an if statement. Okay, so really straightforward. So let's add that in and see what it does. Okay, so at the moment here, we can see it's a little bit messy. It's got these labels and stuff on it, but in essence, it's showing, and we can see by the dates here, it's showing the current year to date. Okay, because it's only going to show the values here, and even though we've filtered for this values here, we haven't switched it on so that it shows items with no data, which is fine. We're fine with that. We don't want to show those ones, so it's just going to show the current year to date. Okay, perfect. Now the next thing we've done is if we go and look at the other values, now we've got these ones here for year -1, year -2, year -3, and year -4, and they all follow the same pattern. Okay, so this time we're going to find last year. So we're going to get the year component of today -1. Okay, so that's simply going to go and look at whatever the value is for the current year. So say it's 2023, it's going to subtract 1. So it's going to give us 2022. So let's add that in. Okay, so now we can see that we've got the values for 2022. So before we go any further, let's tidy this up and get rid of some of these. So I'm going to go to data labels, and I'm going to switch those off. And I'm going to go to markers, and I'm going to switch those off. Okay, so we can just see the lines here. So I'm going to go now and add in the same measures, or the appropriate measures for the year -2 and year -3. Okay, so there they are. These are the different values here. So let's go and try and make these a little bit easier to read. Now they're quite easy to read just now. It looks a lot like small multiples actually, if you've ever used the small multiples approach. But this has been created using separate measures rather than using a category value. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to de-emphasize these ones here. And I'm also going to switch off tooltips for just now. Right, so let's go into our lines and we'll leave all selected just now because that then allows us to see the colours. So here we've got the different values here. So we'll leave the primary one as being blue, and then we're going to go and do something similar to what we did in the past. So let's make that one that lighter colour there. Come back 1 year, and then 2 years, and then the 3rd year. Okay, so we can see it's getting progressively lighter as we go back. We might change these colours in a second. Maybe just a bit too, that's maybe just a little bit too light there. Okay, that's a bit better. I started with I started further up the scale there and just made it progressively lighter as I went back. Now the next thing we're going to do is let's go into each individual one and we'll play with the stroke width and whether it's dotted or dashed. So for the current year, I'm happy with that as being a stroke width of 3. Well, let's change it to 2. Because we did start with 3 in the previous one, but we ended up going to 2. Okay, and then let's go for the previous year. And I think I'm going to leave that as solid. That's fine as it is. And then let's go for year -2, and we'll make that one dashed. In fact, actually, let's go for a dashed one for year -2 because I like the idea of anything that isn't the current year being either a dash or a dot. So let's make that a dash. Okay, and then let's make that a dash. We'll be fine with that. And then let's go for year -3, and we'll make that dotted. Okay, so we can see there's definitely a gradient of colour here, de-emphasising as we go further back in time, with the current year being this one here. So Another thing I want to do is I want to add a data label here to tell us what the actual value is at the end of each year. So let's go and look at how we do that. Okay, so here's the measure here, total downtime cost, end of year only. Now, that's not 100% accurate because it's the end of the year and the most recent date that I've actually going to put into here, but it'll be fine. So we've got the max date, so we first of all want to find the maximum date that we've got that's in the actual table there. Okay, so we're going to use a calculate statement and we're going to basically find the maximum date for the all selected date. So basically all of the date range, all the dates that have been selected across the bottom here are going to be filtered using this all select date, and then we're going to find the maximum date field within that, and that's going to give us this value right to the very end here because we want to basically put a data point there. So that's the first thing. Then we're going to use a switch statement, so that we're going to use switch and then true, so whichever one of these is true, and remember it's going to evaluate that for every single one of the data points. So if the max date, so basically the date that we're looking at here across this x-axis here, is equal to the max date, which is the date we just calculated here, then display the total downtime. Okay, so it's going to display that. So what we're going to actually do here in terms of our strategy is we're going to add another measure which is going to only display data points whenever there's the very final date in the whole date range, or if the date falls on the last day of a year. Okay, so this is what this measure is going to do, and then we're going to put that onto the chart, and then we're going to turn on the data labels just for this measure, and then it's going to show us the data labels at the end of each year and for the current most recent date. Okay, so back to the formula here. So the second statement that it's going to look at, if that's not true, is that the month of the max date is 12 and the day of the max date is 31. So the last day of the year, essentially. And then it's going to, if that's the case, it's going to display the total downtime cost year to date. Otherwise, it's going to be a blank. Okay, so let's minimize that, and we're going to add it in here. Okay, so we've added that in, and we can see we've got these dates here. Now we've got a line, so we need to get rid of the line. So let's go into the format here, and we'll select the measure, which is this one here, end of year only. And we're just going to change that to be 0. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and add in some markers. So we need to switch all the markers on, and then it's going to look a bit messy, but we're going to then switch them all off for each one of the measures except for this one at the bottom here. So I'll just go and do that. Okay, so we can see that we've got these markers now. Now I'm going to change the shape of the markers. Go back to all, and okay, I think that should open up the shape here. Okay, and I'm going to make it slightly smaller, so I'll make it 3. Okay, we just want it to be quite subtle. And then we're going to go to colour, and we've got the default colour, but I'm going to change it to this grey colour here. So I've made these just a little bit smaller. Now we can't, or I haven't been able to suss out how you could actually make the colour the same as the line for each of them. There may well be a way, but I think this is going to be fine. Yeah, it looks fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the data labels just for these, that measure that's sitting behind here. So again, the data labels are going to be on for everything, and then we just need to switch them off for the ones we're not interested in. Okay, so I've switched off all the data labels, and now we're just left with the data labels for the year-to-date total for each one of these, and the year-to-date so far for this year. These are a little bit light, so I'll just change those X and Y axis labels. Okay, so here we have it. Each of the years has got its own line, and each line has got its own formatting and its own colour, and it's got a little data label at the end there just to give you that indication of what it was at the end of the year. And we can see the cumulative losses is clearly getting bigger year on year, and we've got this this value here, and also the fact that the lines are above each other as evidence of that. In addition to that, the benefit of this is that we've actually got the line spatially next to when it actually happened in time. Okay, so we don't have them overlapping each other, where you've got to go and reference an actual legend or a data label to be able to tell which year it is. You can tell by the actual fact that they're above the actual dates that the cumulative figures were accrued. And then the disadvantage of that is obviously it's a little bit more difficult to compare them one on top of the other and see the differences for each of the different month and year or date combinations. So yeah, there's pros and cons to each of these different approaches, and it'll depend on what the visualization is, the space you've got, and what the different requirements are. So there's a couple of options there for you to use. So hopefully you found something useful here, something you can take away and apply in your own dashboards and your own visualizations. Okay, so if you did find this useful, it's always appreciated if you could give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest videos, I tend to release one every couple of weeks, then hit the subscribe button and you'll get a notification whenever I release a new video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video.